The Prime Minister faced questions today in Paris over his interaction with Russian President Vladimir Putin at a peace summit yesterday. Take a look. Cameras caught Trudeau greeting Putin with a friendly handshake, and while they were chatting, the Prime Minister makes a sort of thumbs-up motion. The Prime Minister was asked about the exchange. Take a listen.
That it was important that Mr. Putin be here for a peace conference and discussions around global peace. Mr. Putin knows well our position and the position of the Canadian people on his illegal incursion into Ukraine, his interference in democratic processes around the world, the Russian actions in Salisbury. I have been unequivocal and will continue to. This was a moment to highlight the fact that the world was coming together for peace.
Time to get the Power Panel's take. Brad Levine of Council Public Affairs is in Toronto tonight. Former Quebec Liberal Cabinet Minister Yolande James joins us from Montreal. And here with me in studio, Rachel Curran is a former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, now a Senior Associate with Harper and Associates. And beside her is the CBC's very own Karina Roman. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Yolande, why don't I start with you? What did you make of the Prime Minister's explanation there?
I thought the explanation was fine. I mean, I understand the question given the interaction, but from what I saw and from what I heard, I don't think we can infer that that's a blooming a bromance that we've seen there, especially given the context, as the Prime Minister did say in that clip, has not hesitated to denounce or, contrary to other leaders in the world at this time, has not ever hesitated to denounce, whether it be the annexation of Crimea, whether it be attacks on the chemical attacks to the UK, whether it be Russia's support of Bashar al-Assad. He's not hesitated to denounce that. So the purpose of the gathering, as he did say he did discuss with Vladimir Putin, was to recognize in their exchange the contributions of Russia during World War I and World War II, as he did. And I don't give any other interpretation to that moment other than that.
Yeah, he also said, Brad, that he thought that Putin clearly understands what Canada's viewpoint is on the subjects that Yolande listed off. I do, however, also remember the 2015 campaign when he called Mr. Putin a bully and said, I think something along the lines of, I'd tell him straight to his face or directly to his face. What did you think? Brad, that's for you.
Sure, yes. Well, I agree a lot with Yolande. I would rather have the Prime Minister of Canada sitting next to him at one of those things than Donald Trump. I think that there's a lot better messaging that Canada can do, and I believe there is a Canadian consensus on this. I think all of our political parties are on board with the positioning that the Prime Minister spoke to, and I know that Prime Minister Harper before him has articulated very similar things, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. And I think that any time a country is going to reach out to Putin, it is vital that they outline that which we are in fundamental disagreement. The day and and Trudeau's weekend there, talking about press freedom. I think history is going to look back at this era that we're in globally, and those countries that stand up for freedoms. And the values that we currently hold and articulate them clearly and loudly will be judged much better than those countries who are either too afraid to speak truth to power or want to hide behind these notions of nationalism and the kinds of things that we're seeing coming out of the States right now.
Rachel?
Yeah, so I don't agree with this. It was clearly Prime Minister Trudeau who reached out to Putin and almost welcomed him to the events. Now, look, I agree it's important that the Russians are there. But this is odd behavior, I think, for a leader who has banned our foreign minister from his country, who has very bad relations with Canada, is engaged in sowing discord and disruption across the world. There is nothing that Vladimir Putin is doing right now that is positive in the world. I'm not sure that why we would, literally reach out to him and welcome him to a particular event. So,
we don't know specifically what was said, but do you think he shouldn't have shook his hand?
Well, look, I contrast this to then Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who refused to shake Vladimir Putin's hand and said, "Get out of Ukraine." And that was a clear message. And I think with leaders like Vladimir Putin, you have to show strength. And you have to show, if you are, taking a strong position on something, whether it's the Russian incursion into Ukraine, whether it's Russian interference in our and other elections, you've got to make that pretty clear.
But has Canada's position not been clear?
Well,
does this really go so far as to muddy the waters?
Well, I think so. So outside of this event, I think our position has been clear. But then why reach out to him in a very friendly manner and say,
he says he was referring to that, you did make a lot of sacrifices in those wars, and you're here for a peace summit, and that's a good thing.
Sure, but it looked awfully friendly. It was our Prime Minister who initiated that interaction, who reached out to Mr. Putin, and I'm not sure why that was necessary, given what the Russians are up to these days.
Karina?
So as a journalist, I looked at the tape a few times, and I tried to do one of those, the bad lip reading thing, and really tried to see what he was saying. Wasn't really able to determine what actually was being said. It's obviously not going to be my specialty, but looking at the tape before and after, also wanted to kind of get the greater context. And if we're going to take the Prime Minister at his word face value, you do see that when he sits down and then President Putin comes, there's no one really else around for Trudeau to talk to. So it was kind of awkward as it was, whether or not he should have reached out and shook his hand and made the initiative. But it was kind of an awkward situation because people hadn't come and sat down around. So we did I was looking at that. I also, later on, when Angela Merkel came, she at first did not reach out to Putin, and in fact, I believe he reached out to her, but then they shared a laugh afterwards. So there was a general, Trudeau was not the only friendly leader with Putin there, and I do think there was something strategic there in terms of how Macron sat all the leaders and who he put beside Putin. So, we're not there to hear what they actually said, but, looking in the greater context, you could take what he said at face value, that in this situation, it's not like the G20 where Prime Minister Stephen Harper at the time was very outspoken and said, get out of Ukraine. This is not the G20, this is a peace summit. It's a different kind of thing. So in that case, I guess you could take it at face value.
We'll see.